When people think of mummies, what first comes to mind may be the gilded sarcophagi of Tutankhamun and Ramses II, or perhaps the pyramids of Giza and the long aisles of white, gold and crimson tomb art also spring to mind. But few people realize that mummification has been used by cultures outside of Egypt for millennia. Andean civilizations like the Inca and Nazca people also practiced mummification many centuries after the hunter-gatherers of the Atacama began the practice. For these large-scale societies, status and human sacrifice played a role in the burial method, while in Egypt it was similarly designed to preserve important royals for the afterlife. Let us dive into the differences and similarities between Egyptian mummies and South American mummies. The Egyptian mummies. The ancient Egyptians practiced mummification beginning around 3500 BC. The reason for this type of mortuary practice was to aid in one's passage to the underworld. Ruled by the god Osiris. The ancient Egyptian religion dictated that the afterlife was located near the tomb, and therefore the dead were never far from the living. Much fear surrounded death, which led to rituals that treated death like a robber. This fear extended to the afterlife, as Egyptians even had spells to prevent a second death. Early on, they used sand, the desert sun, and shallow graves to preserve bodies, which weren't yet embalmed. But as burials deepened and more elaborate grave provisions for the afterlife were incorporated, the bodies no longer dehydrated naturally. Subsequently, they devised a way to mummify their dead. They did this by putting a metal rod through the nose to the brain and breaking down the brain tissue. The brain matter was then drained from the nose, and the other organs were placed in canopic jars. The empty corpse was covered in spices and palm wine, placed in natron salt, and then dried for 40 days. The body was then wrapped in linen and topped with resin before being interred. The Inca's imperial mummies. Like the Egyptians, the Inca gave preference to high members of society, especially emperors, who were treated as if they were alive well after their demise. Adorned in the finest textiles and jewelry, the mummies were well tended to, even receiving food and drink. But if this sounds similar to Egyptian philosophy, aspects of Incan mummification were certainly distinct from their counterparts in the Middle East. Incan mummies, like many Andean mummies, were encased in leather or cloth in a fetal position to firmly bundle them. By ensuring their physical stillness, they would enable their spiritual agility through time and the living world. The implication is that the Incan mummies remained close to the earth and their living descendants. By the 15th century, the Inca Empire reigned and conquered other Andean peoples. Their leaders held imperial status, justified by a celestial relationship to the sun, of which the emperor claimed to be a direct descendant. They used their concept of linking past and present to aid in their conquest of other cultures. When they incorporated a new society into their empire, they claimed their dead and brought them to the capital of Cusco for rituals. But mummification also factored into sacrifices to the gods, as the well-preserved girl known as the Maiden proved when her 500-year-old remains turned up in the Andes Mountains in 1999. The mummies of Nazca. Much like the Inca, the Peruvian culture called the Nazca practiced a form of sacrificial mummification. Severed heads, sometimes speculated to be war trophies, appear in the archaeological record of the ancient culture. But the reason for the apparent trophy heads and many of the grave goods remains murky, per the American Museum of Natural History. This year, Life Science reported that some human sacrifices ingested hallucinogens before their deaths. The subject of the study was a child whose head was preserved and whose hair samples showed traces of coca leaves and the San Pedro cactus. a strong psychotropic plant used between 100 BC to AD 450. The head was from one of 22 bodies recovered from a group of human remains which were a mix of both children and adults. Like the Inca, the Nazca people bundled many of their mummies before burial. In 2021, archaeologists discovered a Nazca mummy 800 to 1200 years old that was tied in a fetal position with heavy rope. Surprising as this was, the archaeologists believe it was a funerary practice of southern Peru and nothing more sinister. The individual was likely high-ranking, since he was buried with ceramics, vegetables, and stone tools, with mollusks placed outside the grave as a food offering. The offerings continued for many years, indicating that the Nazca, like the Inca, didn't see death as the end. But that is the end of today's video. We hope you enjoyed it. What related topic would you like us to cover next? Leave a comment down below. We'd love to know. Thank you for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one.